great to see you. You spent many years working with Chuck Schumer, and he appears to be on the verge of a breakthrough here with Republicans in his chamber and the president. How do you see this ending?
It looks like a huge victory for Schumer, for Rosa DeLauro, for mainstream Democrats. This is what they called for 6-7 weeks ago. With some minor alterations, this looks like what the deal is going to be. We're going to split off, the parts of Homeland Security and customs enforcement, border enforcement from the rest of the bill. Everything else is going to get funded. So big win for the Democrats.
Have you seen something like that happen where they split a funding bill, splinter a funding bill to please one side or the other politically here, let the other? I mean, this is kind of an interesting maneuver.
I don't know if I've ever seen this before.
That says something.
Look, everyone says we're in unprecedented times.
Yeah,
so,
here we are.
We're in unprecedented times. That's what's happening.
So the government's funded presumably then for the rest of the year, right? ICE has money for several years.
Right.
What will Mark Wayne Mullen mean at the head of this agency, if anything? The demasking was not accomplished. I don't know where we are with judicial warrants, for instance. But all that still needs to be hammered out.
Right. So look, I think Democrats wanted a couple things. One is to split off the funding here.
Yep.
The other is they wanted to get rid of Kristi Noem, who was unqualified, media addicted, tried to please the boss, should not have had the job. Who knows how well Senator Mullen's going to be, but it is a departure. It is going to be presumably a more professional running of Department of Homeland Security. I do believe there is some desire among the administration and Republicans to tame ICE. They don't want to admit it too loudly, but this issue has rebounded poorly for them in the last 6 months.
I wonder if the next couple of weeks or days at airports might change the way people view ICE with no masks and apparently getting along fairly well with people, with some exceptions. Everybody wants to get out of here in time for recess, I realize, so they're kind of fast walking this potentially right now. But what about the parliamentarian? How do you take portions of the SAVE Act and put that in a reconciliation bill and get that through the parliamentarian? Is that possible?
I don't think it's possible. Now, somebody, just like lawyers can argue on all sides, somebody is going to draft up legislation on the Republican side and make the argument to the parliamentarian that this is principally a revenue matter, not a policy matter. And for those not familiar, reconciliation is a special procedure in the Senate that allows you to avoid a filibuster in rare occasions when it is a purely
budgetary matter,
revenue, revenue associated, legislation. So they've got to go through budget resolution first, take it through the budget committee, instructions to committees, and then put this on, and then it has to clear the parliamentarian. I don't see how that gets done.
So it'll end up being something under the guise of funding for states to enact voter ID policy or something like that. If that'll be the swing.
Even that
we'll see.
May not work because that sounds like an appropriation, not mandatory spending, which is really where reconciliation comes in.
All right. Keep this in mind. Just pack that away. We're not there yet. I want to talk about this important poll that you conducted at Third Way that you were kind to bring to us here. You guys worked with a global strategy group. It was an online survey, 1,400 registered voters back in February. And this is not the first swing that you've made with this group, right? Who say they are likely to vote in a Democratic presidential primary. So it brings us to the headline here. The truth about Democratic primary voters. And you can't find the truth without first identifying who they are. And you went to great lengths to tell us who Democratic primary voters are. What did you learn?
Yeah, so these are voters that say they're going to vote in a Democratic primary. They're taking from, voter lists as well. What we learned is Democratic primary voters are not nearly as progressive as the media, certainly online media, portrays them.
Yeah.
They are looking for a Democrat, to elect a Democrat who is a fighter, but more a fighter for reform, more of a fighter in the moderate lane than the progressive lane. And their number one issue, frankly, is electability. They want to be able to, they're so concerned about Trump, they're concerned about Republicans in Congress. They want someone who can win over someone that, let's say, they agree with every checklist item on the policy list.
I was fascinated by this dichotomy of fights for or fights against. People want a fighter. You established that. But there are, depending on where you fall on the spectrum here of Democrat, it depends where you're going to fall on this particular issue. For moderates, you're going to be a fighter for. And we always hear people come on the program, well, you can't just run against Trump. Well, a lot of people want to. Progressives and even socialists, as you find, want someone who's going to fight against a certain issue, person, or thing. How does that shake out when you're managing a campaign? Right.
So when we ask people to sort of identify where they are ideologically, among Democratic primary voters, about 16% say I'm either a progressive or socialist. About 40% say I'm a moderate, another 30-some% say that I'm a liberal, and they fall kind of in between. But so there's a 2-to-1 margin of moderates over progressives and socialists, and the moderates want someone like fight for an economy that is going to work for me, fight for affordability, fight for schools that teach, fight for government that is accountable, fight for a balanced approach at the border, with strong border and humane interior policy on immigration. On the progressive side, a lot of it is like take on Trump, take on Republicans, fighting for certain things like democracy, and moderates are concerned about democracy, but it's far lower on the list. So there's a, dare I say, more fight for the optimistic side of politics among the moderates.
So this is interesting that we're having this conversation. You and your colleagues at Third Way are known for being dangerously centrist, right? In Washington, that upsets some people. And you're seeing this sort of bias in media coverage and the assumptions that we make that, well, progressives and left-leaning Democrats are going to be more likely to vote in primaries, just like hard right voters are going to, that's the base. MAGA is going to show up at the primary. You clearly feel like this is a narrative that needs to be corrected.
It does. And look, when you get to the general election, both parties have a different dynamic. For a Democrat to win in a typical swing district or state, at a minimum, that Democrat needs to win 60, more likely 65% of the self-identified moderate vote. Republicans only need to win 40, even some like 38% of the moderate vote to win their races. So Democrats need to appeal more to the center to win in the general electorate. But it also means in the primary electorate, our primary electorate is much more dominated by moderates than progressives and socialists, certainly, but those moderates are not online. They don't post on social media. 53% of moderate Democratic primary voters never post online about politics.
How about
never.
That?
So they don't want to be part of that crazy debate out there about whether Bad Bunny is good for America or bad for America.
I hope they're still listening. And I'm really taken by the conclusion, this whole poll, to what you say. This is what commentators and candidates alike should be reminded of. Twitter is not real life. Primary voters are pragmatic. They don't want their nominee to go so far left, you say, in a primary that they cannot win against MAGA and the general. Twitter is not real life. We'll put that on your tombstone, maybe, Jim Kessler.
Absolutely, because I have a Twitter addiction problem myself.
Do?
Oh, I'm on all the time.
But you have to tell campaigns this, right?
Absolutely.
Stay off Twitter.
And it's very hard because you can raise money on Twitter, too.
But that's for sure.
Yeah.
My God.